So what should you upgrade? A new camera body or a new lens? Let's get into it. There's a lot of questions when it comes to deciding whether to upgrade your body or whether to upgrade your lenses. So let's start with the body first. When you're upgrading your body, you need to really think about a lot of things off the bat. Mainly just what are you shooting? Why do you need a new body? What about that new camera body is going to help you produce better images? So for example, for me, I switched over from a GH5 to Sony's a7R III a couple years back, and one of the main reasons that I wanted to upgrade was I knew I wanted to print my photos. I wanted to sell my prints, and I needed a camera body that would take really crisp images and produce an image with a lot of resolution so I could print these photos out and sell them at a really large size. And my GH5 just couldn't really do that. It didn't really have as good of resolution as the Sony a7R III, so I knew it was time to upgrade. Some other important things you might want to consider are, where are you going to be shooting? Do you need it to be weather sealed? How does it actually feel in your hand? And for me, I think the Sony is actually a little small. I'm a little used to it now, but you can kind of see like my hand kind of fits right in there. It's a little small for my hand, but that's also another reason I actually like it. This packs away really easy. That's a great thing about mirrorless cameras, is they pack away really small. And for me, I do a lot of traveling and a lot of shooting where I'm taking my cameras on hikes or way deep into the mountains. So having a relatively small body was super important. So let's talk about a couple features that a new camera body can help improve. The first thing is dynamic range. So what dynamic range is that is the range of the shadows, the darkest part of your image, to the brightest part of your image, the highlights. So it's how much data the sensor from your camera can capture within that range. So the more stops of dynamic range you have, the better your image quality will be. Next up is image noise level. So what's noise? Noise is that grain you see in photos. Typically when you're shooting in a darker setting, this starts to show up, especially if you have a high ISO, you start to notice this noise. So a good camera body, you can shoot at a pretty high ISO with pretty minimal noise. So that's another feature that upgrading your camera body will include. Next up is just actual general features. So for example, your autofocus as well as your tracking. One feature that I really like about the a7R III is the awesome autofocus. So this camera actually has auto eye focus. So it will lock onto your subject's eye and kind of like follow them around while you're shooting. That way you know you're absolutely nailing your focus when you're shooting people. And this was huge for me. I shoot a lot of portraits and a lot of lifestyle content where I'm shooting people, so having that extra autofocus feature is quite nice. Another thing to consider when upgrading your camera body is the continuous shooting mode. I knew that when I upgraded to the a7R III, I really wanted a fast shooting mode so that if I'm capturing a subject doing an action, I can make sure I nail that shot. For example, if you're capturing like a mountain biker going off a jump, it's gonna be pretty hard to just track them and try and nail the shot just by pressing down the shutter once. But if you have continuous shooting, you can hold down that shutter and it's gonna just rapid fire images. This is also called the spray and pray method. So for me, I knew I wanted to have that feature as I capture a lot of lifestyle imagery and people doing action. So I wanted to have a really fast continuous shooting mode, and the a7R III, I believe, shoots at its highest shooting mode is 10 frames per second. So that sounds like this. And that thing is fast, and it just captures a lot of images and makes sure that you're nailing your shot no matter what the action is. Next up is just overall resolution. Like I mentioned before, I knew I wanted to sell my photos as prints, and in order to do that, I wanted to make sure I had a really high megapixel count so that I had a really crisp resolution when I was printing these photos out. If you're never gonna print your photos out and you're really only producing them for Instagram or for a smaller digital place where you're gonna share your photos, maybe having such high resolution isn't as important to you. Something to think about. The a7R III has, I think, 4 custom buttons that you can map different features to. So you can zoom in, you can press another button, it'll lock on their eye. You can press another button and it will show you, maybe your shutter speed really quickly, or take you really quickly to your white balance, or you can zoom in and out on an image really quickly. Once you learn these and can kind of customize the camera to your own personal shooting style, it helps out a ton when you're on the shoot and You know your camera body, you know your custom buttons, and you're just flying through those settings super quick and getting everything just really, really fast. And the quicker you are with understanding your camera body, the easier it's going to be for you to capture better images when you're out shooting, because you're not going to be worried as much about the settings because you have those custom buttons set up to make it easier to shoot with. If having a ton of settings and a ton of custom buttons is something you don't really need because you're kind of maybe beginning your career, or you're just not necessarily sure how to really use those buttons, maybe you don't need to upgrade to a camera body that has 4 or 5 different custom buttons. And the better you understand the camera, the easier it will be to use. There's so many camera bodies out there, so figuring out what camera body will suit you best for what you're shooting is going to be really important. Now let's talk about lenses. In my personal opinion,